Chapter 304. A skinny figure appeared at the entrance that we had come from. This person was around 60 years old, with gray hair all over his head. His face was sickly sallow, and his slender eyes were half open. He coughed from time to time. He looked like a tuberculosis patient, so thin that a gust of wind could blow him away. Just like us, when he entered the cave, a large amount of chi of the way around him surged into his body. Perhaps it was because the endurance of the celestial master realm was stronger, but the amount of chi of the way that surged into his body was terrifying. It almost formed a tornado, so much so that I could see it clearly with my naked eye. The person in the middle of the tornado seemed to be unaware of all this. He covered his mouth and coughed. As he walked over, he looked up at the Tai Sui and the true dragon vein in the distance and muttered something. When he walked closer to me, I heard him mutter softly, "As expected, as expected, as expected." Had Heaven Master Han seen the Tai Sui turning into the true dragon vein before, or had he guessed it? Heaven Master Han's knowledge was far beyond that of Qin Yongting and the others. Heaven Master Han naturally wouldn't mistake the scene in front of him for the true dragon vein transforming into a human. I stood in silence. I couldn't muster up any thoughts of resistance. I only felt a deep sense of helplessness as I quietly waited for the judgment of fate. Before the heavenly master of the Han family appeared, I had imagined the worst scenario. If I couldn't escape, I would have to fight him to the death. But now, I realized to my dismay that fighting to the death was not the worst scenario. Right now, I was numbly waiting for death. That was the most pitiful scenario. Heaven Master Han didn't deal with me immediately, or rather, he didn't pay attention to me at all. He raised his head and stared at the half of the Tai Sui and the true dragon vein in front of him. Only when the storm of Taoist energy that had surged into his body slowly dissipated did he finally remember me. His gaze slowly shifted to me, and he asked weakly, "Are you the remnant of the witch tribe, Zhou Yi?" I gritted my teeth and didn't answer. I gripped the Yin Yama brush tightly in my hand. I didn't know if the numb feeling of waiting for death was due to my cowardice or the heavenly master's aura. However, the only thing I was sure of was that I didn't want to die a cowardly death, even if the other party was the heavenly master. At this moment, Han Wennan suddenly spoke. His voice was simple and honest as he said loudly, "Fourth uncle, I wasn't far away from the battle at the back mountain of the Metaphysics Association. The 10 celestial masters attacked together, but Zhou Yi managed to escape with his life. He wouldn't have been able to do it alone. There was a powerful force behind him. No matter if I was in the pressure point realm or glory realm, the celestial master's power was always unparalleled. At this moment, I no longer had any extravagant hopes of fighting against the heavenly master. The only thought that remained in my heart was to desperately take one more breath and desperately live for one more second. Glory and pride were easily defeated by the will to continue living at this moment. Under the endless pressure, I couldn't inhale a single breath. I was on the verge of suffocating, and my consciousness was getting blurry. However, at that moment, the pressure around me suddenly disappeared. I took a deep breath. Because I had inhaled too much, I choked and coughed. While I was coughing, I greedily inhaled. I looked extremely distressed. After I had regained my breath, I lifted my head to see what had happened. When I lifted my head, I was stunned. A figure appeared at the entrance of the cave. Moreover, I was familiar with this figure. It was Professor Liang, who had left earlier. It wasn't strange for Professor Liang to appear here. After all, when we had approached this place, Han Wennan had urged him to leave. Since he was curious, it was normal for him to sneak in. However, What was strange was that the celestial master of the Han family was gazing at him. The tired expression on his face had disappeared, and his lips were tight. I could see that he was facing a formidable enemy. I didn't understand why the celestial master of the Han family had released me at the last moment because of Professor Liang. Before I could figure it out, the celestial master of the Han family opened his mouth and asked Professor Liang coldly, "Who are you?" Professor Liang didn't answer. It was Han Wennen who answered quickly. "He's Liang Liren, a professor in the team that's investigating the major murder case. He's an expert on the Pre-Qin civilization at Peking University." He could see that something was wrong from Celestial Master Han's face. Then he asked skeptically, "As far as I know, he's been a professor at Peking University for more than 20 years. Why?" Before he could finish, the celestial master of the Han family interrupted him. He turned to Professor Liang and said, "You're not a member of the witch tribe. It's okay that you came here uninvited, but why did you save the remnant of the witch tribe? Aren't you afraid of attracting trouble?" Professor Liang grinned. His wizened face had layers of wrinkles. He smiled and said, "I wanted to save him, so I did. Why do I need a reason? And I found this cave. You're the one who came uninvited." As soon as he finished talking, he disappeared. When he reappeared, he was in front of the celestial master of the Han family. He didn't use any talismans or magical tools. Instead, he aimed his palm at the celestial master's face. Seeing this, I felt much better. Although I didn't know who this mysterious Professor Liang was, he had the power to resist the celestial master of the Han family. The near-death experience made me understand how precious life was. I didn't want to wait for the result of the battle between the celestial master of the Han family and Professor Liang. I wanted to run away. However, as soon as I moved, Chen Yangting, who had been watching me, moved. He stood in front of me and used 2 talismans to block the way. I hurried to use the Yin and Yang Yama brush to block his talismans. My heart sank. Chen Yangting's power wasn't ordinary. I couldn't deal with him alone. I had to ask the spirit snake to help me. The spirit snake's power wasn't bad. Its cultivation base was at the later stage of glorious memory. However, it was just a spirit. At the same realm, it was weaker than a human cultivator. Moreover, Chen Yangting was a core disciple of Mount Longhu's Jingyi school. His techniques weren't something the spirit snake could compare to. Even if the 2 of us joined hands, we could barely fight against him. Just as I had expected, Chen Yangting was like a stubborn dog skin plaster. He stuck to me and the spirit snake. We couldn't get rid of him quickly. My plan to run away was ruined. I was afraid that I could only wait for the result of the battle between Professor Liang and the celestial master of the Han family. However, right at this moment, the celestial master of the Han family's stern voice came from their battle. "Han Wennen, join hands with the man from the celestial master sect and kill this evil remnant of the shaman tribe. If you don't kill him, don't blame us for being merciless." It was obvious that the celestial master of the Han family wasn't in a good situation. Otherwise, he could have waited until the result of their battle to kill me. Han Wennen's face changed when he heard that. A few seconds later, he sighed with a pale face. "Brother Zhou, I'm sorry." Then he took out the leaf magic tool in his hand and attacked me. I sighed in my heart. Han Wennen had always wanted to let me go. Moreover, he was a tenacious person. Even under the pressure of his uncle, the celestial master, he wouldn't change his mind. Unfortunately, as a disciple of an aristocratic family, his loyalty to his family was a principle he had followed since he was young. Now that the celestial master of the Han family wasn't in a good situation, his kindness to me wasn't at the level where he would harm his family's benefits. At this moment, he had no choice but to kill me as soon as possible to help his uncle. A tenacious person would go all out once he made a decision. That was why Han Wen'en wouldn't hold back at all. The spirit snake, and I found it difficult to fight against Chen Yangting alone. After Han Wen'en joined the battle, the situation became extremely bad. Chapter 3:05. 10 minutes had passed since Chen Yangting had started. Counting from when Han Wen'en had joined the battle, it had been 9 minutes. At the 5th minute, the snake spirit collapsed and retracted back into my back. I had to hold on for the next 5 minutes. With my early-stage glory of memory cultivation, I had fought against a late-stage glory of memory and Han Wen'en, who was no weaker than me, for 5 minutes. This was enough to make anyone proud. Even I was in disbelief. However, I couldn't bring myself to be arrogant at all. In fact, I couldn't even form any similar thoughts in my heart. All of my attention was focused on the battle before me. I used every ounce of strength I had to support myself. What had supported me until now wasn't my spirit and willpower. Spirit and willpower were only supplementary powers. When the difference in power reached a certain level, spirit and willpower were just a joke. What had supported me was the 9-star heavenly dipper that I had just comprehended, and the Yin-Yang Yama brush. With my current early-stage glory of memory cultivation, the astral steps consumed a lot of energy. Fortunately, I had the thick shaman energy around me to absorb, which was why I could grit my teeth and use it. Although I could only take the first step, the 9-star heavenly dipper was really strong. When I took the first step, it was as if endless shaman energy spread in front of me, forming a thick barrier. Even Chen Yangting's heavenly lightning talisman was only left with a sliver of power after being blocked by this shaman energy barrier. Apart from that, the Yin-Yang Yama brush gave me another surprise. Originally, the Yin-Yang Yama brush had yin and yang energy flowing around it, forming a yin-yang fish to defend against enemies. However, the Yin-Yang Yama brush had changed. After I injected a large amount of shaman energy into it, there were still 2 energies flowing around the brush. However, these 2 energies were no longer yin and yang energy, but Tao energy and shaman energy. In this place, the Tai Sui and the true dragon veins coexisted with each other. The Taoist Qi and Shaman Qi on the Yin and Yang Yama brush were extremely thick. The Taoist Qi and Shaman Qi on the Yin Yang Yama brush didn't form the Yin and Yang fishes anymore. Instead, they formed 2 simple parallel pillars of Taoist Qi and Shaman Qi, stirring up the 2 auras in the air. They waved like 2 giant whips, and an enormous power poured out, lashing at Han Wen'en and Chen Yangting. Like me, they didn't have any time to breathe. Relying on these 2 items on the surface, I did not seem to be at a disadvantage against the 2 of them. In fact, I was even on the offensive. However, only the 3 of us who were in the battle knew the real situation. Regardless of whether it was the 9 stars heavenly spirits or the Yin-Yang Yama brush, they seemed to be borrowing the witchcraft and Taoist Qis from the surroundings, but in essence, they still came from my own strength. Once the witchcraft and Taoist Qis in my body were exhausted, no matter how many witchcraft and Taoist Qis there were, it would be useless against me. At that moment, after persevering for 10 minutes, the witchcraft and Taoist Qis in my body were at the end of their tether. After using the astral steps for the last time, my face paled, and I didn't even have the strength to stand. I fell to the ground. At the same time, the witchcraft and Taoist Qis that the Yin-Yang Yama brush had drawn out disappeared. I panted heavily. The last bit of strength in my body had been squeezed out. The only thing that could protect me was the light screen of 9 stars, heavenly spirits, in front of me. Chen Yangting sneered coldly. He didn't even use his heavenly thunder talisman. He simply raised the peach with sword in his hand and drew in the air. 3 talismans instantly appeared. Then he pointed the tip of his sword, and 3 illusory talismans attacked at the same time, instantly destroying the last defense in front of me. The power of 9 stars, heavenly spirits, shouldn't be so weak. However, when I used the astral steps, I was already at the end of my tether. Its power couldn't be compared to before. Chun Yongting naturally saw it clearly and didn't need to waste any more strength. After destroying the witchcraft light screen, Chun Yongting held the peachwood sword and walked towards me step by step. Han Wen'en stopped what she was doing and looked at me in a daze for a few seconds. Then she turned around and left, heading in the direction of the Han family's heavenly master. Looking at Chun Yongting, who was sneering at me, the corners of my mouth curled into a bitter smile. Was this place going to be my burial ground? This thought only flashed in my mind for a moment, because in the vast mountain cave, a Buddhist chant suddenly resounded. Amit Ba. Following this Buddhist chant, the huge string of Buddhist beads that I had seen yesterday suddenly appeared again. It was as if a meteorite had fallen from the sky. It appeared out of nowhere above Chun Yongting's head and fiercely struck him. The sneer at the corners of Chun Yongting's mouth froze. In a hurry, he used the astral steps to take 5 steps and placed a red talisman on the peach with sword in his hand. He bent his legs and slightly squatted, raising the peach with sword with both hands. Only then did he receive the Buddhist beads attack. Chun Yongting retreated a few meters in embarrassment. After a trickle of blood trickled down the corner of his mouth, he turned around in shame and anger. Flustered and exasperated, he shouted at Monk Miao Ju, who had suddenly appeared next to us. "You damn baldy! This man is a remnant of the witch tribe." Chapter 306. After revealing his true form, Yen Nantian deliberately looked in my direction with a faint smile on his face. His expression was amiable, and his smile was pure and kind, but in my eyes his smile was no different from that of an evil spirit. Back in the corpse sect, he had deceived me with his pure and kind appearance. If it wasn't for the fact that I had the true dragon's vein and threatened him to lure the people of the corpse sect, not to mention my life, even my soul wouldn't have survived. What was even more frightening was that he wanted to occupy my body and continue living under my name and identity. That was the most frightening thing. Every time I thought about it, I shuddered. Up until now, I still remembered the look of him gnashing his teeth as he left, as well as his malicious words. I had once fantasized that Professor Liang was Nangong, so even when I was besieged by Chun Yongting and Han Wen'en, I still had some hope in my heart. But now, I was in complete despair. The spacious cave was filled with enemies. With my strength, even with the help of Monk Miao Ju, it would be an extravagant hope for me to escape. I sat down dejectedly and no longer paid attention to the situation of Professor Liang and the Han family's celestial master. I smiled wryly and said to Monk Miao Ju, "Thank you for your help, but it's a pity that I'm unlucky. Professor Liang is my former enemy. Today, I won't be able to keep my life. I've caused trouble for Master." I didn't know if it was because the people of the Buddhist sect had good self-cultivation skills, but Monk Miao Ju didn't show any signs of panic. He still chanted the name of Buddha and said with a smile, "Buddha has a past, present, and future. To Buddha, witchcraft energy is just Buddhist power. If Benefactor Zhou is free in the future, why don't you pay a visit to the reclining Buddha temple? I'll welcome you with open arms." His words seemed to contain Buddhist principles. I could only roughly understand that he didn't have any hostility towards me, so it wasn't a good time to ask. I shook my head. "Thank you for your kind intentions, but it's a pity that the 2 celestial masters won't let me leave today. I'm afraid I won't have a chance to go to the reclining Buddha temple. But, Master, you have to hurry and leave before the two celestial masters decide the winner. Monk Miao Ju didn't panic. He clasped his palms together and bowed to me. Then he said with a faint smile, Benefactor Zhou, you are blessed by the heavens. These tribulations aren't necessarily disasters. I believe that I will be able to reunite with Benefactor at the reclining Buddha temple in the future. Goodbye. After he finished speaking, he glanced at Yen Nantian and the Han family's celestial master before walking out of the cave unhurriedly. Just as I had guessed, Yen Nantian and the Han family's heavenly master didn't care about his departure. They only paid attention to each other. Just as Chun Yangting's face changed, Yen Nantian suddenly bent down and searched Professor Liang's corpse. He took out a thumb-sized black pill and threw it to Chun Yangting. Then he said faintly, Kid, your aptitude isn't bad. Swallow this pill and stay with me. Although my cultivation isn't as good as Celestial Master Zhang's, I'm in the Yang spirit realm. It won't be an insult to you to accept you as my disciple. Chun Yangting subconsciously grabbed the pill, his face pale. He hesitated for a while, but when he looked up, he seemed to see Yen Nantian's unhappy face. He didn't dare to think anymore and swallowed the pill. Yen Nantian smiled again and waved his hand, asking him to follow behind him. Then he walked toward me. We meet again. Yen Nantian stopped in front of me and looked at me condescendingly. At this moment, I had already realized that I was going to die, so I wasn't scared. I just nodded. Yes, we meet again. The last time I saw you, you couldn't even deal with me when I was in the acupoint sealing realm. In the end, you had to run away from the Corpse sect. Now, you're strong enough to defeat the Han family's celestial master. Brother Yen, it seems you've been doing well recently. Yeah, Yen Nantian nodded. He still had that fake smile on his face. He wasn't angry at my words and just casually said, Brother Zhou, you haven't been doing well recently. During the time we parted, I didn't ask much about you, but I heard that you were a remnant of the Wu tribe. You were attacked by the 10 celestial masters of the Metaphysics Society. It wasn't easy for you to escape. In the end, the entire Metaphysics Society issued an order to kill you. You're really pitiful. I coldly snorted and didn't say anything else. Yen Nantian seemed to be in the mood to talk. He shook his head and said, I don't know if Brother Zhou still remembers, but the last time we parted, you told me to pray that the next time I meet you, you haven't reached the Celestial Master Realm. To tell you the truth, I've been praying for half a year. No wonder there's the phrase, if you're sincere, you'll get results. This time, when I meet you, you really haven't reached the Celestial Master Realm. Even though I had already disregarded life and death, I couldn't help but feel a chill in my heart when I heard his words. When he was forced to leave, he was extremely angry and ferocious. He said, The next time we meet, not only will I swallow your soul and yang spirit, but I will also swallow your flesh and blood bit by bit. At this moment, he deliberately brought up the conversation at that time. Obviously, he wanted to remind me of his malicious words. I subconsciously raised my head to look at him and couldn't help but shiver. Yen Nantian was an old monster that had been imprisoned in the corpse sex soul-devouring cave for 10 years. His mind must be extremely perverted. Were his words really just a threat? Chapter 307. I felt a chill in my heart as I thought of Fuda and the half bowl of minced meat in that case. Just hearing about cannibalism was enough to make my hair stand on end, let alone having it happen to me. My face paled, and I clenched my teeth, unable to speak. Yen Nantian stood up and sighed. He said with a regretful expression, It's a pity that your body is still useful to me. I can't bear to eat it. Get up. Don't sit there and pretend to be dead. go to the Tai Sui's feet and quickly absorb the shaman energy. This is a rare opportunity. His words stunned me. I immediately remembered that I was currently cultivating shaman energy. If Yen Nantian really treated me as his body, wouldn't I have to cultivate shaman energy as well? Yen Nantian had told me about the corpse sex life-extending technique in detail. After completing this life-extending technique, the power of both sides would fuse together and the cultivation talent would be the same as that of the person being swallowed. I stood up and walked towards the Tai Sui as I asked Yen Nantian, I'm currently a remnant of the witch race that everyone wants to beat up. I also cultivate shaman energy. If you use me as your physical body, are you going to switch to cultivating shaman energy? Yen Nantian chuckled, as if he didn't care about my words. He said, Brat, I've been hiding my entire life in the corpse sect. I'm not much better than you, a member of the witch tribe that everyone wants to kill. You don't have to worry that I won't be able to adapt to your identity. As for cultivating sorcery chi, I was able to cultivate to the Yangshan phase, so I'm not too close to the Tao. Although I haven't reached the peak, I can feel that if I want to pursue the Great Way, the Tao is not a shortcut. Maybe it's good to try sorcery chi. Moreover, look at the Heavenly Tao's corpse. Uft, what Heavenly Tao's corpse? You're used to it. Look at the Tai Sui. Half of its body has turned into a true dragon vein. Don't you think it's strange? My heart shook, and I stopped. Previously, no matter if it was Chun Yangting or Han Wenan, they had thought that this was a true dragon vein transforming into a human. Only I had thought that this was the Tai Sui transforming into a true dragon vein from the soft tubes that had absorbed the true dragon saliva and transported it here. I hadn't been too sure, but from what Yen Nantian had said, he also knew that this was the Tai Sui transforming into a true dragon vein. I hid my surprise and nodded. Of course it's strange. Yeah, Yen Nantian seemed to be emotional. He didn't pay attention to me at all. His eyes were fixed on the Tai Sui and the true dragon vein. After a moment of silence, he spoke again. I've heard of the battle between witchcraft and Taoism, but I've never thought about it in detail. Only when I reached the Heaven's Master Realm did I understand some of the reasons. Chapter 308. I lifted my head to look at the Tai Sui and the true dragon vein. I recalled the countless terracotta figures in the cave and the soft tubes that had absorbed the witchcraft energy and turned it into true dragon saliva. I thought for a while and asked Yen Nantian, so the bloody sacrificial ceremony of the Shang dynasty that you mentioned was the way to turn the Tai Sui into the true dragon vein? Yen Nantian nodded. That's right. The sacrificial ceremony was one of the methods. I didn't know about this before, but while my Yang spirit was staying in Professor Liang's body, I studied the Shang culture. That's how I figured it out. The Shang dynasty was a kingdom of theocracy. The entire history of the Shang dynasty was a bloody sacrificial ceremony. Combined with the battle of witchcraft, it should be during that period that all the Tai Sui's corpses were turned into the true dragon veins. I was stunned by the series of truths. I kept silent and didn't say anything. I suddenly thought of the Shang dynasty's totem. The mystic bird was born in the Shang dynasty. Yen Nantian said that the Shang dynasty was a kingdom of theocracy, and their totem was the mystic bird. It proved that the mystic bird was very important to the Shang dynasty, but the mystic bird was the body of the Jiuqian Xianenvi, and the Jiuqian Xianenvi was the ancestor of metaphysics. I couldn't figure it out, and I didn't want to find out. I walked to the foot of the giant Tai Sui's corpse and sat down, ready to absorb the witchcraft energy. When Yen Nantian saw this scene, he nodded in satisfaction. He chuckled and said, so now you understand why I chose sorcerer chi. Everyone is holding fast to Tao chi. Even though in the past hundreds and thousands of years there have not been many people who have relied on Tao Qi to pluck the stars. But they are still holding on, thinking that this is their Tao. But in fact, everything has its rules. The Taoist Qi obtained from the Tai Sui's corpse is essentially witchcraft energy. In the metaphysics world, there hasn't been anyone who has ascended in the past 1,000 years. Ha! If the Taoist Qi can't open the door to the great path, maybe witchcraft energy can? Kid, work harder on your cultivation. Imagine if I use your body to have the chance to open the door to the great path. Wouldn't you be proud too? I sat down cross-legged and started to absorb the Taoist Qi. But when I heard Yen Nanshan's words, I was dispirited. If it was in the past, I would have been overjoyed to get such a good opportunity and would have absorbed as much shaman energy as I could. But now, no matter how much I absorbed, what use would it be? Wouldn't I just be helping someone else? Thinking of this, I couldn't help but slow down my absorption speed. I tossed all the shock and the truth aside. What was the use of knowing that? It was more important to think about my current predicament. If given a choice, no one would want to die. Yen Nantian wanted to use the corpse sex secret technique to steal my soul and body. That was why he needed a corpse to live in, and let me refine it into a corpse puppet. That way, he could use the corpse sex secret technique. Once I succeeded in refining the corpse puppet, Yen Nantian, and I would have a contract. From then on, I would be under his control until he swallowed my soul and yang spirit to occupy my body. But the problem was that I already had a corpse puppet. I had seen the corpse sex technique. Each person could only have one corpse puppet, and they couldn't change it. If Yen Nantian wanted my body, he would have to occupy Xiao Jin's body. However, Xiao Jin wasn't a corpse. He was a living creature. Would he be willing to be occupied by Yen Nantian? Moreover, Xiao Jin's transformation period was coming every half a month, and it was tomorrow night. If Yen Nantian chose that time, what would the result be? Yen Nantian had just said that the power of the Tai Sui was much stronger than that of the Heavenly Master. In fact, I didn't need him to tell me that. If everything developed according to my plan, when Xiao Jin transformed, Yen Nantian, would he be slapped to death by Xiao Jin? No, Yen Nantian had died a long time ago. This was just his yang spirit. It would be easier for Xiao Jin to smash his yang spirit, right? At that moment, my eyes brightened. I didn't feel disappointed anymore. I lifted my head to look at Yen Nantian, who had turned around and left. The corners of my mouth rose. I slowly closed my eyes and continued to absorb the witchcraft energy. This time, I put in a lot of effort. I didn't want to dawdle anymore. Yen Nantian was right. This was a rare opportunity. I focused on absorbing the witchcraft energy. I ignored everything around me and focused on the witchcraft energy source stone in my body. The witchcraft energy next to the Tai Sui's corpse was much thicker than I had imagined. I had absorbed enough witchcraft energy in the tunnel outside, allowing my witchcraft energy source stone to split into two. At glorious memory 2-star realm, I thought that no matter how much witchcraft energy I had, I wouldn't be able to increase my realm. However, I didn't expect that after absorbing for a short while, the original witchcraft energy star at the bottom of the vein of the sky started to swell again. It quickly reached the critical point of splitting. This time, it was highly likely that I would be able to escape alive. I had long since thrown away the thought of making a wedding dress for someone else. Therefore, I was very excited and continued to absorb the star power. After an unknown period of time, the original power star finally expanded to the size of a walnut and started to shake slightly. With my previous experience, I understood that this was a sign that the witchcraft energy source stone was about to split. If the split succeeded, I would be at glorious memory 3-star realm. In addition to the small ball that I had split off earlier, I now had a total of 3 stars of shaman chi in my body. I had officially reached the 3-star glorious knowledge realm. After my realm had increased, I didn't stop. The 3 stars that had been split into 3 were currently very weak and needed a large amount of shaman energy to replenish themselves. I gradually slowed down the speed at which I absorbed the shaman energy, but didn't stop. I steadily replenished the 3 stars required shaman energy. These 3 stars continued to absorb sorcery energy, and after an unknown period of time, they finally grew to the size of walnuts. Based on my previous experience, the size of a walnut was the limit of a shaman star. Next, it would be time for the shaman star to split and increase its power. In reality, the 3 shaman chi source stones stopped growing, and the shaman chi that I absorbed into my body couldn't stay in them. But this time, no matter how much I tried to stimulate them with the shaman chi I absorbed, the shaman star didn't move. After trying many times, I still didn't succeed, so I could only give up. I understood in my heart that I had already reached my limit in absorbing the shaman aura this time. I wouldn't be able to increase my realm again within a short period of time. I could only first digest the increase in my realm this time before I could increase my realm again. Cultivation, realms were always related to one's state of mind. If one's state of mind couldn't reach a certain level, one's realm couldn't increase. Although I hadn't been troubled in this aspect, I understood this principle. Thus, I didn't force myself. I stopped absorbing the shaman chi and slowly opened my eyes. When I opened my eyes, I didn't see anyone. Yen Nantian and Chen Yangting had gone far away. However, I didn't think that Yen Nantian would leave me alone. He had said that he had something else to do, so he must be somewhere else in the cave, doing something. There were no other exits in the cave, so it was impossible for me to escape. I didn't mind it too much. I stood up and lifted my head to look at the Tai Sui's corpse next to me. I had absorbed a lot of shaman energy, and my realm had increased by 1 realm, but the Tai Sui's corpse didn't reduce at all. From this, I could see how strong the Tai Sui was. It was thousands of times stronger than the amount of shaman energy in my body. When Xiao Jin had transformed, the shaman chi on his body wasn't weaker than the Tai Sui's corpse. It wouldn't have taken him much effort to smash Yen Nanshan's yang spirit. I chuckled. I was in a good mood. I walked to the entrance of the cave to look for Yen Nantian. After walking for 7 or 8 minutes, I finally heard some voices in front of me. I took a few steps forward and looked. It was Yen Nantian and Chen Yangting. They held a searchlight in one hand and a bundle of golden ropes in the other. With every step they took, they would take out a golden rope and tie it around the necks of the terracotta figures on the mountain wall. I didn't understand what they were doing, so I walked forward. Yen Nantian heard me and lifted his head to look. He smiled and said, "Have you cultivated to your limit?" I pretended to accept my fate. My face darkened as I said, "I can't absorb any more shaman chi when I reach the 3rd star of glorious knowledge." Hearing that, Chen Yangting lifted his head to look at me. He looked shocked and envious at the same time. One would only know how difficult and dangerous something was after experiencing it. Chen Yangting was in the later stages of glory of memory, so he naturally had a deep understanding of the increase in glory of memory realm. That was why he was shocked that my realm rose again and again in such a short time. Yen Nantian smiled and nodded. He took out half of the golden rope and tossed it to me. "Not bad. Since you can't absorb any more shaman chi, help me tie the ropes. The method is simple. Just tie the ropes around the terracotta figures." I extended my hand to catch the rope and imitated their movements. After tying a few ropes, I asked Yen Nantian in confusion Why are you tying these ropes? There are so many terracotta figures behind. Did you tie all of them? Yen Nantian walked in front of me and replied without turning his head, "Of course it's useful. Time is of the essence. The Han family's celestial master has retreated due to his injuries, and I used the celestial master sect's name to suppress him. However, it's hard to guarantee that he won't report this matter to the Metaphysics Association. Then, the Metaphysics Association will argue with the Celestial Master Sect. If the Celestial Master Sect receives the news, they will definitely rush over. At that time, our lives will be in danger. Hurry up and tie the ropes. We'll leave after we're done with this matter." As he said that, his hands didn't stop and he continued to tie the ropes. Due to his speed, some of the ropes were only tied around the terracotta figures. Yen Nantian didn't mind, as he reckoned that it was effective. If I hadn't thought of a solution earlier, I might have purposely dragged the time and waited for the people from the Metaphysics Association and the Celestial Master Sect to come. At that time, I wouldn't let him have an easy time even if I couldn't survive. However, I obviously didn't have such thoughts at this moment. I only smiled and imitated him, quickly tying the ropes around the terracotta figures. With my help, the efficiency of the work had increased by a lot. In less than 10 minutes, we had tied all the terracotta figures with ropes and returned to the cave. Yen Nantian was in a good mood. He laughed and threw the remaining ropes aside. Then, he walked to Professor Liang's corpse and stooped to take out a cloth bag from his chest pocket. Then, he led us to the Tai Sui's corpse. I didn't know why, but I didn't ask. Qin Yangting and I followed behind him. When Yen Nantian arrived beside the Tai Sui corpse, he did not stop. Instead, he turned around and walked to the side of the mountain wall. He stomped on the ground with the tip of his foot and soared into the air. He leaped more than 30 meters up and landed on the mountain wall beside the large clump of true dragon saliva. There was a platform there. It didn't look big, but after Yen Nantian jumped up, I noticed that it wasn't small. I guessed it could hold around 10 people. Did he want to take the true dragon saliva? I didn't have time to think. Yen Nantian raised his hand and beckoned Qin Yangting and me to go up. We didn't have his ability, so we couldn't jump directly. We could only use our hands to climb up the mountain wall. However, we were at the glorious memory realm, so our bodies weren't ordinary people's. It didn't take much effort for us to climb up. When we reached the platform, I realized that Yen Nantian's target wasn't the true dragon saliva. He was aiming for the soft tube protruding from the mountain wall next to the true dragon saliva. His eyes greedily looked at the soft tube. He opened the cloth bag in his hand and took out the things inside, placing them next to the thick soft tube. I checked the things he had taken out. There were some unknown fungi and some big obsidian stones with different colors. They had all 5 elements. Finally, there were some live baby mice. They had red skin and their eyes hadn't opened yet. I didn't know what he had done to keep these baby mice alive until now. At this moment, Qin Yangting couldn't help but feel suspicious. He asked Yen Nantian, "Master, what is this soft tube?" This fellow was really shameless. He even called me master. Yen Nantian straightened his body and smiled while stroking his beard. He answered, "This isn't a thing. It's an ancient beast." Beast? Could this thing really be a living thing? I was instantly interested. I raised my eyes to look at the soft tube. Chapter 310. Xianglu? A 9-headed snake. I had never heard of this name before, but I had heard of a 9-headed snake. In my memory, it was a creature from Western mythology. I didn't know that it existed in real life. However, according to Yen Nantian, if this thing was a living creature, it had lived for several thousand years since the Shang dynasty. Ordinary animals didn't have that long of a lifespan. It must be a monster that cultivated. I asked Yen Nantian. This thing has lived for several thousand years, and it has always stayed by the Tai Sui tree and the true dragon vein. I'm afraid its cultivation base isn't low. There was something I didn't tell him. The liquid in the nine-headed snake's body contained the saliva of the true dragon. If the spirit snake swallowed that liquid, it could turn into a dragon. This Xiang Lu must be very powerful. Yen Nantian shook his head. This Xiang Lu doesn't have a lifespan of several thousand years. It should be around 1,000 years old. As an ancient beast, it should have some cultivation base. However, this little thing doesn't have any power. Moreover, it's very timid. We don't need to worry about it attacking people. I was puzzled. Professor Liang, Yen Nantian, had said that this place was a sacrificial culture of the Shang dynasty. The Xiang Lu had used the terracotta statues to create the saliva of the true dragon vein. How could it be only 1,000 years old? According to historical records, the Shang dynasty had been around for 3,000 to 4,000 years. After I asked him, Yen Nantian smiled and said mysteriously, it's a sacrificial culture of the Shang dynasty. The Tai Sui tree and the true dragon vein were mostly created by the Shang dynasty. However, this place isn't necessarily the work of the people of the Shang dynasty. It's not the work of the Shang dynasty. While I was thinking about what he meant, Yen Nantian didn't want to talk about it. He changed the topic and asked Qin Yangting to feed the unknown mushrooms to the mice. Qin Yangting did as he was told. Speaking of which, it was strange. Yen Nantian didn't know what method he used, but those bright red mice that had obviously not been weaned on milk stretched out their noses and sniffed the fungi. It was as if they had smelled milk. They climbed up and quickly devoured the fungi. Although the mushrooms were not big, the newborn mice were only the size of a thumb. After eating the mushrooms, the 5 mice's bellies bulged as if they were about to explode. On their transparent skin, blood vessels protruded one by one, looking disgusting and strange. After finishing this task, Yen Nantian did not stop there. He took out another 5 obsidian stones with different attributes and placed them in front of the little mouse's mouth. Just now, the little mice eating those fungi was already shocking enough. Now, after these little mice smelled the obsidian, they were still unable to endure it. They didn't care that their stomachs were about to explode and opened their mouths to bite the obsidian. Obsidian was a meteorite from outer space. It had been tempered by the friction of the atmosphere, so its hardness could be imagined. However, the strange thing was that the mouths of these little mice that had not grown teeth could actually bite it. Like eating a cake, he ate the obsidian into his mouth bit by bit. As a result, the little mouse's perfectly round belly swelled up even more. It was to the extent that its belly was propped up on the ground, and its 4 legs were lifted into the air, unable to touch the ground. Even so, they were still greedily devouring the obsidian until they had eaten all the big obsidian stones. After eating, the 5 little mice turned into 5 round balls, lying there motionlessly. They didn't open their eyes, and I couldn't see if they were in pain or not. Yen Nantian picked up each mouse. After checking them carefully, he nodded in satisfaction. Then, he carefully placed the 5 mice on the thick tube jutting out of the mountain wall next to Xiang Lu's body. They didn't touch Xiang Lu's body directly, just a few centimeters away. After everything was done, Yen Nantian sat cross-legged on the ground. He gestured for us to sit down as well. Now, we just need to sit here and wait. I didn't know what he was planning. As I was about to ask, Qin Yangting spoke first. Master, what's the use of these mice? Can they lure Xiang Lu's entire body out? This thick tube looks like Xiang Lu's mouth. But you said that Xiang Lu is a 9-headed snake. Do we have to deal with the other 8 heads one by one? Yen Nantian looked like a good teacher. When he heard my question, he carefully explained, 9 is the extreme number. Xiang Lu is a 9-headed snake, but it doesn't mean that he has 9 heads. It just means that he has a lot of heads. In this cave, the terracotta statues on both sides of the wall have Xiang Lu's head. This soft tube should be Xiang Lu's tail, and the hole on it is his excretory outlet. His explanation was beyond our expectation. On the way here, we had seen thousands of terracotta statues on both sides of the wall. It seemed that Xiang Lu wasn't a 9-headed snake, but a 10-headed snake. What puzzled me more was the thick tube's tail. According to him, Xiang Lu had used his mouth to absorb the spirit energy from the corpses inside the terracotta statues and excreted true dragon saliva. I turned to look at the half-gaseous, half-liquid mass of true dragon saliva not far from us. I suddenly felt a little nauseous. Chun Yangting was like a curious baby. He bowed his head and pondered for a while. Then he asked, "Teacher, why did you put those mice on Xiang Lu's tail? If you want to lure it to eat, you should put them near your mouth, right?" Yen Nantian stroked his beard and smiled. "It's a long story. Xiang Lu is somewhat similar to my yang spirit. On the surface, its body is huge and stretches across the entire cave. The ancient book even says that it eats the 9 earths, that is, it can swallow the 9 mountains. But in fact, Xiang Lu's body is just an inch-long snake. Its huge appearance is just its skin or its shell. When Xiang Lu's body grows an inch, its shell can grow 10,000 meters. It's really mysterious. Moreover, Xiang Lu is timid. Its body hides in its shell, and no one can find it. Even if we dig out its shell and bring it back, its body can run away if we're not careful. After it runs away, the inch-long Xiang Lu can regrow a 10,000-meter-long shell in just a blink of an eye. That's why it's hard to catch it. No wonder Yen Nantian kept saying, 'Xiang Lu, this little thing.' I thought he was just casually calling it that. I didn't expect that this Xiang Lu, which looked so huge, was actually a little thing. After explaining the strangeness of Xiang Lu, Yen Nantian told me the reason why he had set up the bait. As for the reason why I put these mice on its tail, it's because the tail is the farthest from its head. Xiang Lu's speed is so fast that naked eyes can't see it. Even the Heavenly Master can't detect it. However, Xiang Lu lives in the head, and it only eats in the head. I used a secret technique to paralyze Xiang Lu for a while. But this little thing is an ancient species. I'm not sure how long the bait can paralyze it. That's why I have to buy more time in other places. The further the bait is, the longer it will take it to eat. It'll be easier for us to catch it. After explaining for a long time, Yen Nantian didn't show his impatience. His temper and patience were excellent. If I didn't know his real face, it would be hard to see through his disguise. At this moment, Chun Yangting looked at Yen Nantian with admiration. He hadn't called Yen Nantian master because he didn't want to be shameless, but because he was sincere. Of course, if it wasn't like that, he wouldn't have deceived me in the Incorp sect, and I wouldn't have sincerely called him Big Brother Yen. After Yen Nantian explained the reason, the 3 of us didn't say anything. We looked at the 5 mice and quietly waited for Xiang Lu to take action. After around 30 minutes, the mice didn't move, and neither did Yen Nantian. The spirit snake on my body suddenly became restless. It anxiously transmitted its voice to me. "Kid, that thing is coming. Hurry up and leave this place." I was surprised and looked at Yen Nantian. He didn't notice my situation. I slightly lowered my head and asked the spirit snake, "You mean Xiang Lu? Why do you want to leave this place?" "Yes, it's Xiang Lu. That thing is very ferocious. In ancient times, it could even swallow a dragon. It's really scary. Hurry and take me away from here. When I heard the spirit snake's words, I was a little scared. However, after listening to him, I understood. Chapter 311. Yen Nanshan's speed was extremely fast. By the time his voice was heard, he had already jumped off the platform and was heading towards the outside of the cave. Qin Yangting also hastily climbed down the mountain. Although I didn't have much intention to help, I was interested in the Xiang Lu. Thus, I followed behind Qin Yangting. When we reached the outside of the cave, Yan Nantian didn't go far. He stood there and looked down at the golden ropes hanging from the terracotta figures. When he saw us come out, he said, "The Xiang Lu needs a few minutes to eat. You two stay here. After 5 minutes, you will start to check the golden ropes from here. I will start from the other end of the cave. If you see the ropes turn red, immediately shout. You understand?" Qin Yangting nodded. "I understand, Master." Yen Nantian nodded in satisfaction. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly stopped. He pointed at me and said to Qin Yangting, "Be careful. Keep an eye on that kid. Don't let him play any tricks." After Qin Yangting nodded, Yen Nanshan's body flashed and disappeared from the other end of the cave. After Yen Nantian left, Qin Yangting and I remained silent. After about 5 minutes, when I was about to leave, Qin Yangting suddenly called out to me, "Brother Zhou." I was stunned by the way he addressed me. I turned to look at him, feeling a little playful. I smiled and said, "I don't deserve to be called brother by Chen Daozhang. What's wrong? Does Chen Daozhang have something to say?" Qin Yangting lifted his head to look at the other end of the cave. As he walked forward, he lowered his voice and said, "Brother Zhou, we've been fighting for our lives. I know that you have a conflict with me. That's normal. But now, we're both under the control of this old thing. We have to work together to escape." His words confused me. I stopped and looked at him vigilantly. This fellow had just called me master, and now he wanted to discuss how to deal with Yen Nantian? Was he being sincere, or was he trying to trick me? I maintained my vigilance as I slowly walked forward. I asked, "The one in danger should be me." Yen Nantian said that he wanted to take you as his disciple. Becoming the disciple of a heavenly teacher isn't a disgrace to you. Why are you being controlled by him? When Qin Yangting heard what I said, he proudly raised his head and said in a clear voice, "I am the disciple of Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu. It's true that this old thing is a celestial master, but even 10 celestial masters can't compare to Celestial Master Zhang. If I sincerely worship him as my master, wouldn't I be abandoning the light for the dark?" I had no choice but to address him as master. "Brother Zhou, don't underestimate the pride of the people of Mount Longhu." At this moment, I finally believed Qin Yangting's words. I couldn't help but look at him in a new light. This fellow had targeted me time and time again, so we had a deep grudge against each other. However, these were two different things. His words of loyalty to his teacher sounded very responsible. It was laughable that Yen Nantian was such a cunning old thing. He had been hunting geese all day, but had been pecked blind by geese. He had actually been tricked by Qin Yangting. My expression didn't change. I lowered my head to check the ropes on the terracotta figures as I asked him, "Chen Daozhang is telling me to cooperate with you, but if we really escape, won't you still want to deal with me because I'm a remnant of the witch race? My cultivation isn't as good as yours. If I escape from Yen Nanshan's tiger's den, won't I have to enter your wolf's den?" Qin Yangting hastily shook his head. "Brother Zhou, don't worry. Times have changed. If we really escape, I'll let you go and won't attack you. Even if we meet again in the future, as long as there are no outsiders present, I won't attack you. What do you think?" His words were extremely sincere. Since he could trick Yen Nantian, it wouldn't be a problem for him to trick me. I really found it hard to believe him. In reality, if I didn't have any other choice, I wouldn't have any other choice but to cooperate with him, regardless of whether I believed him or not. However, I had already thought of using Xiao Jin's transformation to deal with Yan Nantian, so there was no need for me to take the risk. Thus, I shook my head and said to Qin Yangting, "Of course I'm willing to agree to your conditions. However, you have to know that Yan Nantian is a celestial master. You and I only have glorious consciousness cultivation. Why do you think Yan Nantian would leave the two of us here while he went ahead to check on the situation? It's not because he trusts you, but because in front of absolute power, tricks are useless. Yan Nantian doesn't care at all. Moreover, it's fine if I escape, but even if you escape, there's still Yan Nanshan's pill in your body. How are you going to neutralize it?" Even though I said it perfunctorily, Qin Yangting replied, "Seriously, you don't have to worry about that. My Dragon Tiger Mountain has a tradition of 2,000 years. How can a small celestial master be compared to it? As long as we escape, Celestial Master Zhang will naturally cure me of the poison. As for what you said, I understand. However, we don't have any other choice. Once this matter is settled and we're brought out of this cave, I'm afraid we won't have another chance to escape." I couldn't help but admit that his analysis was reasonable. It was a pity that I only had to be responsible for my own life. His life and death had nothing to do with me. I grinned. There will always be a chance. Since Yan Nantian left the two of us here, he must be on guard. This isn't a good chance to escape. Chun Daozhang, please don't be impatient. After laughing, he turned around and patted Qin Yangting's shoulder a few times. He praised loudly, "Well done. This Xiang Lu is a treasure. I won't forget you when I get the benefits. After this matter is over, I'll help you improve further and break through to the Celestial Master realm after we get out." Qin Yangting's face beamed. I didn't know if it was true or not. All right. After making his promise to Qin Yangting, Yan Nantian put the bag on his body. Then he took us out of the cave. I guessed Yan Nantian was in a good mood because he had successfully captured Xiang Lu. On the way, he pointed at the terracotta figurines and said to me, "Kid, didn't you ask why Xiang Lu is only 1,000 years old? It's not a difficult question. Lower your head and look at these terracotta figurines. Do you see anything?" Terracotta figurines? I had looked at these terracotta figurines many times. Was there something I didn't see? I didn't ask. After looking at them for a long time, I answered, "I didn't see anything. Besides some simple lines, there's nothing else." "Ha! The problem lies in those simple lines." Yan Nantian shook his head and said, "Although the Shang dynasty belonged to the antiquity time, it had already given birth to an ancient civilization. The sacrificial ceremony was the most important thing in the country. From the emperor to the common people, everyone had to participate. The sacrificial ceremony was very luxurious and exquisite. Look at the inside of the cave. No matter if it's the sacrificial altar outside or the terracotta figurines in the cave, everything is extremely simple. It has nothing to do with luxury or exquisite, especially these terracotta figurines. They can't even be compared to the ancient porcelain excavated from archaeology. How could the sacrificial ceremony of the Shang dynasty be so simple? I was surprised. I hadn't thought about this before. Yan Nantian didn't wait for me to think more and said, "Moreover, there's another big problem. Where are we?" "Shenzhen," I answered subconsciously. Yes, Shenzhen. During the Shang dynasty, other than the land of Bashu, which had other civilizations after Lingnan, it was a barren land. Why would anyone travel thousands of miles, cut through brambles and thorns to come to Shenzhen, and specially build such a simple and crude place of worship? When I was in university, I studied ancient Chinese, so I was familiar with history. Yan Nantian was right. During the Shang dynasty, although Guangdong wasn't a barren land, it was thousands of miles away from the Central Plains. There were no interactions between the two. The power of the Central Plains also couldn't reach here. Even if there was a sacrificial ceremony, it could only have been done by the local tribes. It was impossible to have a sacrificial ceremony for the mystic bird. Moreover, this cave was extremely large. With the power of the small tribes, it was impossible for them to build such a huge project. I couldn't help but be curious and asked, how did this cave come about? Was it built 1,000 years ago? Yan Nantian nodded. That's right. This place was built according to the sacrificial ceremony of the Shang dynasty. Moreover, you must have heard of the person who built it. At that time, the foreign tribes invaded the Central Plains, burning, killing, and pillaging. They borrowed the power of the Northern Dragon Vein to destroy the Middle Dragon Vein and seize the fate of the Han people. This person used his power to lead the Han people to resist. At the same time, he found the Tai Sui and imitated the ancient ritual of the Shang dynasty. He used the Tai Sui to stabilize the fate of the country and the true Dragon Vein to revive the Southern Dragon Vein. He built this sacrificial ceremony here in an attempt to save the country from collapse. Unfortunately, he failed at the last step. He couldn't wait for the Tai Sui to be completely transformed. Chapter 3:12. When I thought of Wen Tianxiang, the first thing that popped into my head was Mount Wen's lineage. When Zhang Canwen had told me about Mount Wen's lineage, I had thought that it was far-fetched. After all, it was common for people to find a famous ancestor for themselves. However, if what Yan Nantian had said was true, then Wen Tianxiang really was a feng shui master. In his later years, he had often been active in the Guangdong area. It made sense that he had left a lineage. However, using the Tai Sui to stabilize the fate of the country, and using the ancient ritual of the Shang dynasty to revitalize the dragon's vein was too unimaginable. During the declining era of the Han dynasty, one person had used the ancient ritual to find the Tai Sui and revitalize the entire dragon's vein. It was unbelievable. The dragon's vein started from the Kunlun Mountains, and there were 3 in China. The northern dragon went down the Yellow River through Qinghai and Gansu to Mongolia's Beijing, and then the 3 provinces in the northeast to Korea. The middle dragon went down the Yangtze River and the Yellow River through Sichuan, Shaanxi, Hunan, Anhui, and finally Shandong. It stopped at Zhongyue and then merged into the Bohai Sea. The southern dragon went down Yunnan and Guizhou through Guangdong and Guangxi, along the coast of the southeast Fujian, Zhejiang, and Jiangsu. The dragon's vein was said to be a small grave and a big one to stabilize the country. In history, the rise and fall of dynasties and the change of imperial power were all related to the dragon's vein. Since ancient times, the middle dragon had been the leader of China. Civilization had started in Halua, and the royal power was in Xi and Luoyang. These 2 places were on the middle dragon's nodes, and that was the era when the Chinese civilization was at its peak. As time passed, all things had their ups and downs. The middle dragon disappeared, and the northern dragon flourished. As time went by, it was the end of the Song dynasty. The Liao dynasty and the Jin dynasty replaced each other. The Yelu and Wanyan clans dominated the world. In the end, under the iron hooves of the Mongols, the entire Eurasian continent fell. The Han dynasty, the favored child of creation, had been living in the world for thousands of years. At this moment, it finally ended its rule over the world. From then on, although there were commoners who rose from the right of the Huai River and borrowed the power of the southern dragon to reclaim the throne, the stars changed and the power of the Northern Dragon could not be stopped. 300 years later, they finally made a comeback. Compared to that, what was even more difficult to say was that the Western Dragon calendar had been accumulating for thousands of years. When the Central Plains fell into the flames of war, the dragon chi gushed out, and the Great Voyage era began. Their footprints gradually spread all over the world, and their rule followed. Following that, the dispute over royal authority in the Central Plains had nothing to do with the general trend of the world. The center of power shifted to the west, and a new era finally arrived. Moreover, 1,000 years ago, the Southern Song dynasty was content with a corner of its territory. The Minister of Literature supported it independently, and the military and government were powerless. In the end, they could only try to change the world and use the dragon vein to determine the ownership of the tripod. What happened in that era was impossible to verify at this time. However, after a simple analysis, he understood what was going on. The city of Lin, and in the Southern Song dynasty, was today's Hangzhou, located at the node of the Southern Dragon's tail. If one wanted to prosper the Southern Dragon, one had to find the place where the dragon would prosper, and Guangdong and Guangxi were the keys. With my current cultivation, I could not see the specific location. However, from the actions of the Minister of Literature, there was no doubt that the place where the Southern Dragon would prosper was in Shenzhen. Perhaps the power of heaven could not be disobeyed, and the reason for the Minister of Literature's failure could not be verified. However, as a Han, in retrospect, this feng shui master who tried to save the fate of the Han people and the fate of China could be called the backbone of the Han people. Thinking about it, who would not be in tears? On the day of the Cliff Mountain, on the Yinzhou Lake, beside the cliff gate, Lu Xiufu carried the Emperor of Song into the sea. 200,000 Han people could not resist and jumped into the sea with their last faith. Among the 3 heroes at the end of the Song dynasty, only when Tianxiang was captured on the Mongolian warship. He witnessed this scene, but did not go to the netherworld with them. Instead, he survived and went north to Yanjing for 3 years. Outsiders could not understand the hardships he had gone through. Thinking about it now, he must have held a glimmer of hope and waited for the arrival of the Tai Sui. Unfortunately, history only left him with a long sigh. While thinking about these things, I kept silent. Then, I remembered Zhang Canwen and his brother. When Fei had passed away, and Zhang Canwen was the only one left in Wen Shan's bloodline, I wondered how he was doing. According to the legends, on the day of the Cliff Mountain, the Minister of Literature's bloodline had all died. Wen Shan's bloodline was the only one without a bloodline. If something happened to Zhang Canwen, his bloodline would be cut off forever. With this thought in mind, I had to protect Zhang Canwen if I had the power. While I was deep in thought, we had left the cave and arrived at the big cave where we had first arrived. I didn't know why, but Deputy Chief Zhang and the others who had stayed here were gone. The lighting equipment was still there, brightly illuminating the cave walls. I looked around. This place used to be a cave, and it had been renovated just like the terracotta statues. At that time, the Minister of Literature didn't have the time or manpower to make exquisite items. That was why the cave walls were rough and unadorned, and all the rocks were exposed. It wasn't strange at first, but in this environment, the square altar we had arrived at looked strange. The reason was that the altar was too exquisite. The altar was 10 meters long and 10 meters wide. It was made of quartz stones, which were rare. Moreover, these stones were piled together, and there were no gaps between them that the naked eye could see. It was really exquisite. In addition, the round well on the altar was even more exquisite. It was impossible to tell what material it was made of, but it gave off a faint fluorescence in the night. Moreover, it was not made of stone at all, but was carved out of a single boulder. Compared to the rough and unadorned surroundings, this altar was really eye-catching. Along the way, I couldn't help but stare at the altar. When we reached the round well, I scooped some water from the well and sniffed it. The water was clear and had a faint fragrance. I hesitated for a while, but I didn't dare to take a sip. The water was clear, which proved that this water was flowing. There must be a deep well that connected to the water underground. This made me even more suspicious. In ancient times, it wasn't easy to dig a well, especially a well that went deep underground. No matter if it was a drought or a flood, the water in this well would never run dry. It was really precious, even with enough manpower. It would take several months to dig a well like this. Why did the Minister of Literature have to dig such a deep well? I had so many questions in my head, but I couldn't figure out the reason. At this moment, Yen Nantian was standing by the well. However, he didn't go up first. He asked Chun Yongting to go up first, with me in the middle and him at the back. This old man was really careful to prevent any accidents. He had even thought about the order in which we should go up. Chun Yongting's eyes brightened. He thought that if he went up first, he might be able to escape. However, his eyes only brightened for a second. If he went up first, unless Celestial Master Zhang was waiting outside the well, he wouldn't be able to run far. Yen Nantian could easily catch him. At that time, he wouldn't be able to be his disciple anymore. Chun Yongting obediently grabbed the rope and climbed up. I didn't think much about it and followed behind him. We climbed up together. After the two of us had climbed up, Yen Nantian stood at the mouth of the well. However, he didn't hurry to get up. He just stood there with his head lowered, his eyes gazing at the water under his feet. I didn't know what he was thinking. When we were halfway up, I lowered my head to take a look. Yen Nantian finally lifted his head and prepared to come up. However, just as he was about to jump up, his face changed. He roared, and his translucent sun god body suddenly exploded with a bloody light. His body instantly turned into a red line and shot up from the bottom of the hole. In just a second, he had arrived next to Chun Yongting and me. He grabbed us from both sides and pulled us out of the hole without saying a word. After getting out of the bloody hole, Yen Nantian didn't slow down. His feet didn't touch the ground as he directly rushed out of the cellar and into the orchard. After reaching the ground, Yen Nantian seemed to have gone crazy. He continued to run with us, but he didn't leave horizontally. Instead, he flew vertically into the sky. He brought us dozens of meters in the air before he suddenly steadied his body. Even with Chun Yongting and my glory of consciousness cultivation, we were still in a difficult situation. After leaving the ground, we felt even more uncomfortable. Chun Yongting caught his breath. Just as he was about to ask, Yen Nantian suddenly raised his hand and interrupted him. His blood-stained head hung low, and his bloodshot eyes stared at the situation below. Instinctively, I followed his line of sight. Right at this moment, a dark shadow appeared at the entrance of the cellar dozens of meters below us. That shadow wasn't like Yen Nanshan's young spirit shadow, and it was also different from Tong Tong's Yin spirit physique. Instead, it looked like the old principal's corpse that had been reconstructed with some bloody flesh on its body. The withered and small body was wrapped in the shadow as though it was wearing a black robe. Its body was bent, and its head looked similar to a skeleton, except for a layer of waxy, yellow flesh. However, what was different from a skeleton was that this shadow didn't have a skull. Where the skull used to be, there was a huge depression, and there was nothing inside. The slender head only supported an inverted triangular face. After leaving the entrance of the cellar, the shadow just stood there and didn't chase after us. It just lifted its head to look at us. Because it didn't have a skull or a brain, Its eyes were at the top of its head. What was strange was that on the skull there was a pair of complete eyes. Those two eyes were huge, without any blood vessels or blemishes. They were black and white, and looked like a beautiful woman in her late 20s. However, there was no love in those eyes, only a boundless black aura. With just a glance, I felt as if I had sunk into that black aura. The chi of the way in my body surged wildly, and the 3 sorcerer chi source stones collided chaotically. My consciousness began to blur. Right at that moment, the jade bracelet on my neck suddenly released a clear stream. After it quickly circulated through my body, I spat out a mouthful of blood and regained consciousness. Chapter 3:13. Yen Nantion grunted in pain next to me. I turned around and saw that Yen Nanshan's yang spirit shadow had dimmed a lot. Chen Yangting was even worse off. His eyes were closed, and his face was dark gold. Black blood flowed from the corners of his mouth and nostrils. Yen Nantion held him in his hand. He had fainted. I couldn't help but feel scared. What was that shadow? I'm still fine, as I've only just stepped into the middle stage of glorious memory, so it's still acceptable for me to be injured by a glance. However, Chun Yangting's cultivation is at the late stage of glorious memory, and he's a direct disciple of Mount Longhu. His skills are unfathomable, yet he was injured to this extent by just a glance from that shadow. There was no need to mention Yen Nantion as a yang spirit strong that even the heaven master of the Han family could not defeat. He did not even think of attacking the black shadow. Once he came into contact with it, he immediately fled for his life. At this moment, he was also injured. Without waiting for me to speak, Yen Nantion slowly descended from the sky. When he landed, he didn't dare to stop to check his wounds. He dragged us and ran for several kilometers before stopping. The Yu family's orchard was in the suburbs. After running for several kilometers, it was a wasteland. Yen Nantion found a flat area and put us down. He didn't check Chen Yangting's situation. He sat down cross-legged and began to circulate his energy to adjust his breathing. Although I didn't think it was a big problem, I had vomited blood. I didn't dare to be careless. I also sat cross-legged to check my body. After confirming that I was okay, I exhaled in relief. If I wasn't wrong, that shadow was the source of the evil aura that had injured Lu Chuanda. Moreover, the murderer of Yu Fuda's murder was also that shadow. Yen Nantion had sensed that the aura in the well wasn't right, so he had run for his life. That shadow must be living in the well. When Yu Fuda killed Lu Chuanda, the blood pond was facing the well, and there was a passage connecting it. It wasn't just a coincidence. But what was that shadow's cultivation base? Why was it so strong? Normally, even if an Yin soul cultivated to the Yin spirit realm, its strength would be far inferior to a heaven master of the same realm, not to mention that the Yang spirit true body was the natural enemy of Yin souls. This black shadow's realm was probably one level higher than the Yang spirit. I don't know how it compares to Tai Sui, but since I started cultivating apart from Tai Sui, this black shadow is the strongest thing I've seen. About 10 minutes later, Yen Nantion finally opened his eyes. The red light on the sun god phantom had dissipated a lot, and his body was more solid than before. It was obvious that he was fine. After he woke up, he glanced at Chen Yangting, who was still unconscious. Then he turned to look at me and asked, "Why are you okay?" Of course, I wouldn't tell him about the jade bracelet's strange condition. I spread my hands to show that I didn't understand. Yen Nantion didn't pursue the matter any further. He turned his head and began to examine Chen Yangting's condition. After a while, Yen Nantion placed his hand on Chen Yangting's lower abdomen. He circulated his energy, and his palm turned red. He slowly pushed up from his abdomen, all the way to his neck before letting go. After repeating this process several times, Chun Yongting sat up from the ground. Black blood spurted from his nose and mouth. He opened his eyes and asked weakly, his face confused, "What happened?" After saying that, without waiting for anyone to reply, he seemed to suddenly recall the scene from before. His pupils violently shrank, and his face was filled with fear. He asked Yen Nantian, "Master, just now that ghostly shadow, what was it?" Yen Nantian didn't answer, but asked him to stand up. He looked around, found a direction, and led us forward. After walking for a long time, Yen Nantian sighed and said to Chun Yongting, "That thing was a Jing ghost." Jing ghost? I was bewildered. I'd seen it before. Not only that, but Tong Tong had also put the Ghost King, level Jing, ghost into the jade bracelet. I was puzzled. How could a Jing ghost be so powerful? I've caught one before, but it had just reached the Ghost King level. Yen Nantian shook his head. Jing ghost is just a general term. The ghosts in the well are all called Jing ghosts. But in fact, Jing ghosts connect to the 9 serenities. I heard that this kind of deep well is connected to the netherworld. There are many great cultivators in the underworld. It's not strange that a Jing ghost with that kind of power appeared. But the heavenly path has its own rules. A ghost with that kind of power shouldn't come to this world. As he spoke, he fell into doubt. After muttering to himself for a long time, he suddenly said, "That's right. This Jing ghost must be related to the Tai Sui, giving birth to a true dragon." When Tianxiang had imitated the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ceremony to revive the southern dragon vein. However, the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ceremony had been abandoned a long time ago, and no words had been passed down. How did he find this method? I'm sure he had contacted the 9 serenities to summon the soul of the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ceremony to host this sacrificial ceremony. No wonder I found a seal on the well after the sacrificial ceremony. When Tianxiang must have sent the soul of the Shang dynasty's sacrificial ceremony back to the well and sealed it. He wanted the soul to return to the 9 serenities. However, after hiding for 1,000 years, the soul finally broke the seal and came out of the well. And the previous case must have been caused by the soul. No wonder it had the Shang dynasty's totem. His speculation was the same as my own. I lifted my head to look at him. What should we do now? Since the soul has seen us, will it come back? Should we inform the people in the metaphysics world? Otherwise, if the soul comes back, it will bring us a big disaster. Yen Nantian looked at me oddly. If it didn't follow us, it won't trouble us anymore. As for the disaster, you don't even have time to take care of yourself. I stopped talking and didn't want to arouse Yen Nantian's suspicions. We didn't talk for the rest of the way. After walking for more than an hour, we arrived at the hotel where Yen Nantian was staying. When we entered the room, I was surprised to see Ling Duyu there. Seeing our group walk in, Ling Duyu stiffly stood there and didn't say anything. After Yen Nantian closed the door, he directly asked me, "Do you still remember the corpse-sex-corpse puppet refining technique?" I nodded. Yen Nantian pointed at Ling Duyu and said, "There's no time to lose. You should refine him into a corpse puppet now." I was surprised and asked suspiciously, "He's a living person. How?" Before I could finish, I suddenly remembered something and cried out, "He's the corpse demon." Yen Nantian grinned. "That's right. This is the place I've chosen for my body. Of course, I've always kept it with me." I turned to look at Ling Duyu. No wonder I always felt that he was dull and dull. He was actually that corpse demon. I didn't know what method Yen Nantian had used to make the corpse demon look like a human. Moreover, I couldn't see any flaws in his movements. While I was looking at him, Yen Nantian impatiently urged me to hurry up. I stopped looking at Ling Duyu and turned to smile at him. I pretended to be embarrassed and said, I can't refine it. Yen Nantian raised his eyebrows and said unhappily, What? Have you forgotten the refining technique? I shook my head. Of course I haven't forgotten. I've already refined a corpse puppet. If I remember correctly, I can only refine one corpse puppet. It's impossible to refine a second one. The moment I said that, Yen Nanshan's expression became unfriendly as he stared at me. After staring for a while, he said, Brat, don't think that I won't dare to do anything to you, just because I want to take your body. Is what you said true? I had already thought of an excuse, so I didn't hesitate. I nodded and pretended to be indifferent. As long as the corpse sect doesn't have any schemes, a corpse puppet can greatly increase one's strength. After obtaining the method, I will naturally find a way to refine one to protect myself. Yen Nantian was silent for a long time. After a while, he coldly said, Don't tell me that your corpse puppet is already dead. I shook my head. No, my corpse puppet is still fine. It's just that it's not by my side. Yen Nanshan's expression softened. He waved his hand as if he didn't want to listen to my explanation. He directly said, Take me to find your corpse puppet. I nodded and didn't hesitate. I walked out of the shop. Why would I be manipulated by him for so long? Yen Nanshan's face was filled with curiosity, not fear. After thinking for a while, he nodded and gestured for me to push the door open. When I opened the door, I saw Xiao Jin sitting on the bed. He was still playing with the remote control. He didn't watch the TV, but kept changing the channel. He had been playing this game for a month, but he was still very excited. When Xiao Jin saw me, he looked happy. He didn't move, but he turned his head and grinned at me. He didn't even notice Qin Yangting and Yen Nantian behind me. I moved aside to let Yen Nantian walk in front of me. I didn't say anything and just pointed at Xiao Jin. As soon as Yen Nantian saw Xiao Jin, his eyes widened. He stared at him for more than half a minute. Then, with a confused and excited face, he turned to me and said, You're right. It's a young Tai Sui. His aura is correct, but he doesn't have any power. TSK. Creation is so magical. Kid, you're really lucky. What a lucky chance it was for you to meet him. I cracked a smile. Yen Nantian was right. Meeting Xiao Jin was my lucky chance. Yen Nanshan's eyes sparkled as he looked at Xiao Jin for a long time. He couldn't help but praise. You're worthy of being the Tai Sui. Even my ghouls don't have this kind of intelligence. It seems you don't need to command it. It can sit, lie down, and walk on its own. I was surprised. Instinctively, I answered, Xiao Jin has intelligence. He doesn't need my command. He doesn't need you to command him? Yen Nantian shook his head. How is that possible? No matter how strange the Tai Sui is, it's just a corpse. A corpse is just a pile of dead meat. Unless it's a ghoul with intelligence, how could it move on its own? Moreover, the Tai Sui isn't an ordinary corpse. When a Tai Sui dies, a new Tai Sui will replace it. The Tai Sui's corpse emits endless witchcraft energy. It can't have intelligence. Otherwise, the ancient Tai Sui's corpse wouldn't have turned into the true dragon's bloodline. This time, I was bewildered. Yen Nantian didn't know much about Xiao Jin, but I couldn't catch up with him when it came to knowledge. Moreover, he knew the nature of the witchcraft battles in ancient times. How could he not know the situation of the Tai Sui? More importantly, I started to have doubts about Xiao Jin. When Yen Nantian told me about the Heavenly Tao's corpse, I thought that there were only 4 Tai Sui in this world, and that all the Tai Sui were Heavenly Tao's corpses. I instinctively thought that Xiao Jin was also a heavenly Tao's corpse. That was why I wanted to refine him into a corpse puppet. But now, I understood that the so-called heavenly Tao's corpse referred to the Tai Sui's corpse, not the Tai Sui. Yen Nantian had wanted to refine the Tai Sui into a corpse puppet, but he was referring to the dead Tai Sui. However, Xiao Jin wasn't a corpse. He was a living Tai Sui. The corpse insect's corpse puppet refining method was effective on corpses. It was just a misunderstanding that I had used this method on Xiao Jin. It shouldn't have worked. However, the problem was that this method had worked. Xiao Jin had been refined into a corpse puppet. Why was it like this? It couldn't be because of the refining method. Yen Nantian didn't need to lie to me about this. Moreover, he was the great supreme elder of the corpse insect, so he must have a good understanding of the corpse insect's cultivation method. He couldn't be wrong. If there was no problem with the cultivation method, there shouldn't be a problem with me. Could it be that there was a problem with Xiao Jin? Thinking about this, I was even more confused. After refining the corpse puppet, the feeling of blood connection between Xiao Jin and me wasn't fake. Not only were our hearts connected, but we could also communicate with our thoughts. We were very close to each other. Moreover, Xiao Jin listened to everything I said. It was impossible for him to hide anything from me. If there was no problem with Xiao Jin, then what was the problem? After thinking for a long time, I still couldn't figure out the reason. When I came back to my senses, I raised my head and saw that Yen Nantian was still staring at Little Gold. His gaze carried a trace of suspicion, as if he had thought of something but didn't dare to confirm it. I wanted to ask him, but Yen Nantian didn't seem to have any interest in talking. He waved his hand and said, "Since you've already refined the corpse puppet, I don't have any other choice. I'll take this Tai Sui. Is there a secluded place nearby? The Tai Sui's item isn't ordinary. I'm afraid that something strange will happen when we stay there. Our identities can't be exposed, so it's better to be safe." Hearing this, I was overjoyed. Yen Nantian's words had solved the two problems that I was worried about. He didn't object to living in Xiao Jin's body. Moreover, he took the initiative to find a secluded place. When Xiao Jin transformed, I wouldn't have to worry about attracting trouble. Although I was excited, I didn't show it on my face. I faintly said, "We're in the city of Shenzhen, where every inch of land is worth its weight in gold. There are secluded places, but I'm afraid that we won't be able to find a place without people." Yen Nantian coldly snorted, "Since we're in the city, let's go to the outskirts. We'll find a place without people there. There's no time to lose. Let's depart now." He had finally fallen into my trap. Tonight was the night that Xiao Jin would transform. It was almost evening. When we arrived at the outskirts, it was almost midnight. Everything was unimaginably perfect. I was so happy that I almost went crazy. I pursed my lips and didn't say anything. Yen Nantian didn't doubt my attitude. When he brought me and Xiao Jin out, he pretended to be scared and said to me, "Brat, don't be too pessimistic. With this old man's experience in this life, along with your exceptional talent, your life will definitely be splendid. You won't have any regrets. Moreover, there's still a lot of time before you become a heavenly master. You still have plenty of time to enjoy your life. Think about it. You're a remnant of the witch tribe. If it weren't for me, you would have lost your life in that cave. If that's the case, every day that you live is a day that you've earned. Why do you have to frown?" He looked like he was comforting me, but he was actually mocking me. He didn't even try to hide the ridicule on his face. I gritted my teeth. Of course, I wasn't trying to hold back my anger. I was trying to stifle my laughter. Then, Yen Nantian brought us to call a car. We headed to the outskirts of the city. On the way there, I didn't dare to say anything. It was very difficult to endure. I kept thinking about Yen Nanshan's expression when he found out that Xiao Jin had returned to his original form. I didn't know if he would be more frightened or resentful. I wasn't sure. However, there was one thing that shouldn't be unexpected. His face wouldn't have the ridicule from before. Chapter 315. The Feng Shui Metaphysics shop was in the northeast of Shenzhen. If we took a taxi from there to the suburbs, we would have to go in the northeast direction. The route Yen Nantian had chosen wasn't much different from the route I had asked Wang Kuan to take me when Xiao Jin transformed. The final destination was in Longmen County, which was on the border between Hui Province and Huyuan. It wasn't far from the place I had chosen last time. It was evening when we left. After we got off the taxi, I checked the time. It was around 11 o'clock p.m. If I'd felt a tinge of uneasiness before, I'd completely calmed down by now. Yen Nantian, that old bastard, had been thinking about me for a long time. Even if he grew wings, he wouldn't be able to escape today. After we got off the taxi, Yen Nantian looked around. He randomly picked a hill and took us there. While we were walking, I used divine sense to talk to Xiao Jin. I told him about the hostile relationship between me and Yen Nantian. I also told him what to do after he transformed and recovered his power. Xiao Jin's mind was pure. He didn't have any concept of good or evil. Killing people or saving people didn't mean anything to him. He didn't have any doubts about my arrangements. He nodded and agreed. After talking to Xiao Jin, Yen Nantian stopped. However, he didn't say anything. He just lowered his head as if he was thinking about something. After thinking for a while, he raised his head and stared at the full moon and the starry sky for a long time. He then turned his head and looked at me, then at Xiao Jin. He didn't say anything, but his face seemed to be filled with uneasiness. I was startled. Did Yen Nantian discover something? Cultivators' spiritual senses were stronger than ordinary people's, and their sixth sense was even stronger. They could predict the future. Moreover, as their cultivation base deepened, this ability would become stronger. Moreover, the corpse sect was also a branch of metaphysics. Although they mainly practiced other techniques, they had some knowledge about divination. It was possible that Yen Nantian had predicted something. However, I lowered my head and checked the time. There were only 2 minutes left until midnight. Even if Yen Nantian knew my plan, a mere minute wouldn't be enough for him to reverse the situation, let alone Yen Nantian. I was no longer worried. I met Yen Nanshan's gaze and smiled at him. At first, Yen Nanshan's eyes were filled with doubt. However, when he saw my smile, his pupils shrank. The sun god's shadow reappeared with the same red light that had appeared when he'd faced the terrifying well ghost. He stared at me vigilantly. After a few seconds, maybe it was because he saw that I didn't react, he relaxed a little and shouted, "Let's not waste any more time, and do it right here. Quickly order the corpse puppet to stop, lie on the ground, and give up resisting." I stood still and didn't smile at him. I just looked into his eyes and shook my head. "Big Brother Yen, when we were in the corpse sect, you gave me pointers and helped me increase my cultivation. At that time, I truly regarded you as a big brother that I could rely on and trust. But what about you? Everything was just to make use of me. From the very beginning, you've been scheming against me. Isn't it enough to harm me once? You've painstakingly continued to cause trouble for me. I just want to ask you, have you never had a conscience in your heart?" Yen Nantian was obviously very anxious. He impatiently scolded me. "Shut up. Do you think it's useful to try to befriend me at this time? Don't be so long-winded. Hurry up and order your Tai Sui corpse puppet to lie on the ground." I laughed self-mockingly. Yanantian was right. At this time, I should just do what I had to do. There was no need to be long-winded. I smiled at him again, but my expression slowly turned cold. "You're right. I didn't come here today to befriend you. I came here to kill you. Xiao Jin, attack." When I said the last few words, only coldness and sternness remained in my voice. As I said that, Yan Nanshan's expression suddenly changed. The scarlet light on his body suddenly surged. At the same time, Xiao Jin, who had been silently standing next to us, flew up. His clothes were torn apart and flew far away. In an instant, he returned to his original body that was dozens of meters tall. The golden light on his body was extremely dazzling. At the same time that his body grew bigger, countless strands of hair on his head whistled as they flew towards Yan Nantian. Yan Nantian wasn't bad. After he realized that something was wrong, he shrouded his body in a scarlet light. He burst forth with a speed that was even faster than when we had met the Jing ghost during the day. He seemed to have turned into a red bolt of lightning as he shot past me and into the night sky. This old thing was extremely cautious. Once he realized that something was wrong, he didn't have any thoughts of risking his life. His only thought was to run away. Although this choice looked like a coward, I had to admit that being cautious was always the best way to save one's life. However, it was a pity that under the absolute difference in power, being cautious was useless. Moreover, Xiao Jin and I had been unprepared. Hence, Yan Nantian was destined to suffer a tragedy today. Xiao Jin's thick hair was extremely fast. Moreover, as he flung his hair, it also grew crazily. Even though Yan Nantian was as fast as lightning, he couldn't escape the fate of being tied up by Xiao Jin. In just a blink of an eye, Yan Nantian, who used to be high up in the sky, was tied up like a rice dumpling by Xiao Jin. At this moment, his eyes didn't have the teasing look anymore. Instead, they were filled with endless fear and confusion. He tried his best to turn his head to look at Xiao Jin's real body. He mumbled, "It's impossible. How could it be? It's impossible." When he finally got a hold of himself, the confusion in his eyes was gone. His eyes were filled with respect and flattery. He kept begging me, which was completely different from his previous image. I couldn't help but recall the first time I had met him in the corpse sect. At that time, he had used up all of his Yang God power, so he was very respectful to me, a junior in the acupuncture realm. He even treated me as his peer. Unfortunately, when his Yang God power recovered, he quickly changed his attitude. I didn't bother with him anymore. I just calmly told Xiao Jin, "Kill him." Xiao Jin was as loyal as a robot. Without any hesitation, he threw Yan Nanshan's Yang God shadow into his big mouth. He didn't even chew before swallowing it. I was slightly stunned. However, I thought that the Yang God body might help Xiao Jin recover his power, so I didn't mind. I gently exhaled and turned to look at Chun Yangting, who was standing to the side in a daze. When he saw me turn to look at him, Chun Yangting suddenly came to his senses. His face was filled with fear. He lowered his head and bowed to me. He stammered, Brother Zhou, your corpse puppet is really strong." This fellow was quite intelligent. In his panic, he tried to curry favor with me to lessen the conflict between us. I didn't say anything and just smiled at him. Soon, Chun Yangting stopped talking and lowered his head to look at the ground. His face was deathly still. Just when I thought that he had accepted his fate, he suddenly raised his head. After taking a few steps forward, he knelt on the ground and said loudly to me, "Brother Zhou, I know that there is a deep grudge between us. There is no point in discussing who is right or wrong. As long as Brother Zhou doesn't kill me, I Qin Yangting, am willing to become your slave. I will serve you from now on. If Brother Zhou doesn't feel at ease, I won't have any complaints, no matter if you make a Dao hard oath or use any other methods to control me. His actions were far beyond my expectations. No wonder Yan Nantian took a liking to him and accepted him as his disciple. The two of them were equally shameless. I looked at him with interest and asked, Chen Daozhang, you are the direct disciple of Celestial Master Zhang of Mount Longhu, a late-stage glorious memory grand cultivator, and a hall master of the Celestial Master Mansion. Are you really willing to become a slave? Qin Yangting didn't hesitate at all. He immediately nodded and emphasized, if Master is worried, you can use any method. This fellow was really shameless. With the grudge between us, if I wanted to live in this situation, this was probably the only path I could choose. It wasn't hard to make a choice, but it was hard to be so decisive and without any hesitation. To tell the truth, I couldn't help but be tempted. Even though we were both in the glorious memory realm, Qin Yangting was different from Xie Chenghua and the rest. Qin Yangting's strength was exceptional, even stronger than mine. His future development was limitless, and he even had hopes of breaking through to the Celestial Master realm. Taking him as a slave could greatly increase my strength. From another perspective, the grudge between Qin Yangting and me was that he had failed to kill me multiple times, and that he had heavily injured Tong Tong, causing him to still be unconscious. But thinking about it carefully, he hadn't done anything to me, and Tong Tong's current condition was rather stable. I didn't have a knot in my heart that I had to kill him. This was a huge temptation, and I couldn't even think of rejecting it. Unfortunately, what I shouldn't have done was that Qin Yangting tried to ally with me to deal with Yan Nantian in the cave. The proud expression on his face at that time left a deep impression on me. He was deeply proud of his status as a disciple of Mount Longhu. Even if Yan Nantian, a celestial master in the Yang spirit realm, accepted him as a disciple, he still wouldn't be willing to be my slave. If I kept him, he would be a disaster sooner or later. Chapter 3:16. After hearing my words, Qin Yangting's countenance changed several times. From begging to surprise, from surprise to anger, from anger to despair. That was all he could do. Xiao Jin was fast and didn't give him any time to react. He didn't even have the time to think about it. After dealing with Qin Yangting, I searched his body. I thought that he was an important person in the Celestial Master Mansion, and that he would have many treasures and cultivation techniques. However, I didn't expect that he only had some talismans, a peachwood sword, and a wooden sculpture of the three pure ones. Apart from that, he didn't have anything else. I was a little disappointed. However, after checking the talismans, I became excited again. There were only 9 talismans left on Qin Yangting's body, but 7 of them were the kind of heavenly thunder talismans that he had used before, and their power was extraordinary. The other 2 talismans were the ones that had injured Tong Tong and could summon 3 bolts of lightning. According to the talisman, this talisman was called the Thunder Tribulation Talisman. The last one was an ordinary tranquil talisman. Moreover, it looked old and shabby. I didn't know when it was an antique. The Heavenly Thunder Talisman in Qin Yangting's hands had left a deep impression on me. I hated and was afraid of it. At the same time, I was envious of it. This kind of talisman was really powerful. When he used it casually, a bolt of lightning would strike down. It was so powerful and fast that even people with the same power couldn't resist it. Moreover, this talisman was the natural enemy of Yin spirits. It was also very practical. The only thing I was worried about was that this kind of talisman was the Celestial Master Sect's trademark. The Celestial Master Sect was famous for being overbearing and protective of its members. If the Celestial Master Sect found out about this, it would be troublesome. However, I thought that it wasn't a bad thing. If I encountered any trouble in the future, I could use the Heavenly Thunder Talisman in the name of the Celestial Master Sect. Perhaps it would have a miraculous effect. After carefully putting the talismans away, I turned around and gave the jade bracelet to Xiao Jin. When he transformed, it was the fastest time for him to absorb the true dragon vein. I had wasted a lot of time killing Yan Nantian and Chen Yangting. I couldn't waste any more time. When Little Gold started to absorb the true dragon's vein, I sat down cross-legged. Previously, when I was in the sacrificial cave, I was heavily injured by the Han family's celestial master. However, with the nourishment of the mysterious Yin liquid and the subsequent increase in my realm, my injuries have long since healed. Now, I am sitting cross-legged in order to consolidate my previous increase in realm. Chapter 317. I excitedly told Tong Tong about my conjecture. Tong Tong grinned. She was obviously very happy. However, after smiling for a while, she anxiously asked me about what had happened while she was unconscious. It was obvious that she didn't care about the ability to control lightning. Seeing this, I couldn't help but smile wryly. Even though Tong Tong had exceptional talent, she had only embarked on the path of cultivation because of me. She probably didn't like cultivation at all and wouldn't care about this kind of talent at all. Feeling helpless, I didn't mention it again. I smiled and sat down. I briefly told her what had happened after she had fainted. When she heard that I had been besieged by the 10 heavenly masters and that my life was hanging by a thread, Tong Tong looked anxious and worried. Tong Tong heaved a sigh of relief when she heard that Nangong and the others had saved me. However, when she heard that I had reunited with the Red Shadow, she became excited. Her eyes sparkled as she asked me, "Is Sister Red Shadow beautiful? Is she super powerful?" Ever since Tong Tong had been with me, I had often told her about the Red Shadow. Moreover, the jade bracelet that Tong Tong was in had been given to her by the Red Shadow. Tong Tong had always been a loyal fan of the Red Shadow. When she suddenly heard the news, her eyes were filled with excitement. As I talked about the Red Shadow, I couldn't help but smile. I briefly told her about the situation that I had been with her for the past few days. After listening to me, Tong Tong pouted. "Why did you leave after only a few days? Even if you left, you should have brought Sister Red with you. How could you leave alone?" I helplessly spread my hands and explained to her that the Red Shadow was trapped in the seal and couldn't leave the Fire God Temple for a long time. Tong Tong instantly clenched her small fists and cheered me on. "Sister Red is trapped in there. Brother, you must work hard to cultivate and become stronger. In the future, you can defeat the Fire God and save Sister Red. Then we can live happily ever after." I swallowed my saliva and my eyes almost popped out. Tong Tong had been with me for the past few years and had read many love stories. She had always been moved to tears. I didn't expect that she would use what she had learned and make up stories for me and the Red Shadow. I didn't know if I should laugh or cry. I looked at Tong Tong's solemn face and couldn't help but smile. I promised him that I would work hard to cultivate and save Red Shadow. Tong Tong nodded happily. Then she seemed to recall something. She solemnly promised me that she would work hard to cultivate and help me save Red Shadow. This little fellow was always so lovable. I extended my hand and rubbed her head. Tong Tong turned around and hugged my arm. She seemed to be enjoying it very much. At first, I wanted to ask her to temporarily return to the jade bracelet, but seeing her reluctant face, I didn't urge her. I turned around and called Xiao Jin to go back with us. Tong Tong knew Xiao Jin, but she didn't know that Xiao Jin had turned into a child and stayed by my side. When she heard me call Xiao Jin, she was stunned. Then she exclaimed in disbelief. She couldn't even speak properly. She pulled me with one hand and pointed at Xiao Jin with the other. She stammered, "Brother, brother, is that really Xiao Jin?" While asking, she stretched her hands and drew a big circle. Then she continued to ask, "Xiao Jin is so big, and he is so small. How could he be Xiao Jin?" I smiled and called Xiao Jin over. I briefly explained Xiao Jin's situation to her. Tong Tong nodded, as if she understood. She hid behind me and peeked at Xiao Jin from time to time. Her small face was filled with curiosity. At this moment, Xiao Jin walked over and handed me a black cloth bag. I received it and found it familiar. I touched it and felt something that looked like a soft tube. Suddenly, I remembered that this cloth bag was the one Yen Nantian had used to capture the Xiang Lu yesterday. According to Yen Nantian, the Xiang Lu was a supernatural creature from the Desolate Age. It was an incredible treasure. However, he didn't tell me what it could do or how to use it. I held the cloth bag and pondered for a while. "Xiao Jin, do you know what the Xiang Lu is? What are its effects?" After Xiao Jin had returned to his baby form, he didn't have the wild and domineering aura of his real body. He looked dull. He thought for a while and shook his head. "I only know that it's a Xiang Lu. If I swallow it, it's harmful to me. That's why I took it out when I swallowed Yen Nantian. I don't know anything else." I nodded. In that cave, Xiang Lu was the key to turning the Tai Sui's corpse into a true dragon's vein. He would be harmful to the Tai Sui. However, at this moment, I wanted to know what effect it would have on humans. I thought for a while and patted my back to summon the snake spirit. When we had captured the Xiang Lu, the spirit serpent had sensed it before Yen Nantian. I guessed it knew something about this thing. As soon as it appeared, the spirit snake's two small eyes instantly stared at the cloth bag in my hand. First, it shrank its head back with a frightened expression, then looked around and asked me suspiciously, "Brat, why is this thing in your hand?" I simply told it what had happened. The spirit serpent's big eyes brightened. It stuck out its tongue a few times, its face excited and greedy. It blushed and rubbed its head against my body. Its voice became flattering. Brother Zhou, you don't need this thing. Why don't you give it to me?" I was surprised. "Give it to you? Aren't you afraid of it?" The snake spirit was honest this time and immediately replied, "I'm afraid of this thing, but isn't it now that you've caught it?" Chapter 3:18. To be honest, if not for the Tao Qi encountering the heavenly barrier, I definitely wouldn't have chosen witchcraft or a glory. It was because of the dangers involved in cultivating witchcraft aura. After hearing the truth of the battle of witchcraft from Yen Nantian, I was filled with sympathy for the ancient shaman tribe. But that was all. I had never been an ambitious person, nor did I have the thought of cultivating witchcraft aura to seek justice for the shaman tribe. It wasn't that I didn't have a sense of justice, but I knew my own limits and couldn't bear the responsibility. In reality, witchcraft or a glory wasn't my own choice. It was just that I didn't know what solar eclipse meant back then, so I muddle-headedly took that step. Now that I thought about it, if I had understood everything back then, would I have stepped into the river in the illusion without hesitation? It was hard to say. Perhaps I would still step over it, but that would only be because I was burdened with the blood feud of my parents, so I had no choice but to do so. But now, a new opportunity presented itself to me, if I had guessed correctly, and Xiang Lu's body was that miraculous. I would still have the same cultivation after transforming witchcraft aura into Tao Qi. The heavenly barrier would naturally dissolve, and I wouldn't have to face the pursuit of the metaphysical world in the future. I could cultivate Tao Chi in peace. With my top-notch Four Meridians talent, I was almost certain that I would be able to break through to the Divine Master realm in the future and had a high chance of success. Even if I couldn't rely on my own talent, I could still use Xiang Lu's feelers. Everything seemed perfect, as though there was no need for hesitation. Strangely, the hand that I was holding onto the black cloth bag felt heavy. I couldn't help but recall many things from before. The figures of Nangong, Yi Pianpian, and Yi Maolon flashed past my mind. I was now certain that Nangong was a member of the shaman tribe. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been paying attention to me. Yi Maolon was most likely one as well, although Yi Pianpian wasn't certain, judging from her decision to save me despite the danger, and her relationship with Yi Maolon, she was definitely related to the shaman tribe. That's right, there was also Xiao Jin. Although I still didn't know why Xiao Jin was so close to me, he had given me the black bead the first time we met. He had helped me many times in the future. He had even helped me get rid of Yan Nantian and Chen Yangting just now. All of them definitely hoped that I could continue cultivating witchcraft aura, either openly or secretly. If I chose to transform witchcraft aura into Tao Chi, I would be much safer, but would I let them down? Also, although I was tested to be a peerless Four Meridians talent at the Young Phoenix gathering, I still feel that it's because I have 5 pillars of light, and those 5 pillars of light are the effects of shaman chi. If I gave up witchcraft aura, would I still have the witchcraft chi? Witchcraft, and a top-notch with witchcraft. The more I thought about it, the heavier my heart became. The idea of transforming the shaman chi into the chi of Tao was slowly loosening, and then it was shaken. I had mixed feelings in my heart, and I couldn't make up my mind no matter what. Tong Tong, who was hiding by my side, seemed to have noticed my uneasiness. She shook my arm and asked, "Brother, what's wrong? Did the little snake make you angry?" I came back to my senses and grinned. I threw the messy thoughts in my mind to the side for the time being. If I couldn't make a decision, I would maintain the status quo. Anyway, the people in the metaphysics world couldn't find me. If I had to face a desperate situation while cultivating witchcraft aura, it wouldn't be too late to consider transforming witchcraft aura. Seeing that I didn't talk, Tong Tong looked at the serpent spirit with unfriendly eyes. The serpent spirit was so scared that he shivered and retreated. He tried to explain to Tong Tong, but Tong didn't listen to him. 2 chains made of Yin energy with electric arcs appeared in his hands. He was ready to attack at any time. The serpent spirit didn't dare to talk anymore and tried to hide behind me. Speaking of which, the snake spirit's current strength was probably not much worse than Tong's, but his fear of Tong had long been deeply rooted over the years. Moreover, he obviously knew that once there was a conflict between the two of them, I would definitely help him. Therefore, this guy had no intention of resisting at all. I smiled and pulled Tong Tong. "It's not the serpent spirit's fault." Tong Tong stopped. He shot the serpent spirit a fierce look and put away the supernatural power in his hands. Although he knew the general function of the Xiang Lu, the serpent spirit didn't know the details. He needed to study them later. I wasn't in a hurry to deal with the Xiang Lu. I packed the cloth bag and called Xiao Jin, the serpent spirit, and Tong Tong to go back. It was the morning of the next day when we returned to the Feng Shui metaphysics shop. When we entered the shop, Xie Chenghua was sitting there anxiously. I didn't know what he was thinking. When he lifted his head and saw me, he jolted up. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he didn't. He lifted his head and looked behind me for a long time. Then he exhaled in relief. "Boss, are you all right?" I smiled and nodded to comfort him. "I'm fine." However, I was curious. From Xie Qinghua's appearance, it was obvious that he had noticed something wrong when I brought Yan Nantian and the others here yesterday. However, his cultivation was only at the early stages of the glorious knowledge realm. Moreover, he had barely reached the glorious knowledge realm with the help of the obsidian stone. It was impossible for him to advance any further. How did he find Yan Nantian yesterday? Out of curiosity, I asked Xie Qinghua, "Did you notice something was wrong yesterday?" Xie Qinghua sat back on the chair and nodded. "Yes, when boss came back yesterday, I've seen that person with you in the capital before. He seems to be from the Celestial Master Mansion. His power is terrifying. I'm afraid that he's not far from the Celestial Master Realm. I saw that his expression wasn't friendly, so I didn't dare to say anything. Boss, how did you offend such a fiend?" I was stunned. Then I smiled bitterly. I had thought that he had used some method to find Yan Nanshan's young god. It turned out that Qin Yangting had scared him to this extent. If he knew that there was a celestial master at the scene, wouldn't he have a heart attack? I didn't want to tell him too much and was prepared to brush him off. However, just as I was about to open my mouth, I thought about it and vaguely told him the truth. After hearing that, Xie Qinghua was dumbfounded. He stood there in a daze for a long time. Then he reacted and asked me while trembling, "Boss, you're saying that you killed that person from the Celestial Master sect and killed a Celestial Master's young god?" His expression was strange. He was afraid and suspicious, but at the same time, there was a hint of excitement. I smiled as I took out 2 heavenly thunder talismans and handed them to Xie Qinghua. These are the heavenly thunder talismans of the Celestial Master sect. They are very powerful. Below the Celestial Master realm, almost no one can match them. Keep them close to your body. If you encounter danger in the future, you might be able to escape with your life. However, you have to be careful. I found these talismans on the person from the Celestial Master sect. They might bring you trouble. It's best not to use them if possible. Subconsciously, after receiving the heavenly thunder talismans, Xie Qinghua's expression changed again. His suspicion disappeared, but his fear and excitement increased. He lowered his head to look at the heavenly thunder talismans, and then at me. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but he couldn't say anything. I reached out and patted his shoulder. I didn't say anything and just took Xiao Jin to the 2nd floor. I understood Xie Qinghua's thoughts very well. After discovering that I was in danger yesterday, he might have been worried about my safety, but he was more worried that if something happened to me, he wouldn't be able to remove the seal on his body. At the same time, he probably started to doubt my strength. At this time, it was necessary to have a heart-to-heart talk and show my strength. After all, he was now a great help to me. Chapter 319. When I first saw that corpse in the Corpsine sect, I was scared out of my wits. The corpse had a huge amount of Yin energy, which was almost at the heavenly master realm. If the corpse hadn't gained intelligence and had a chaotic soul that didn't know good or evil, Yan Nantian, and I wouldn't have been its match. It had been a year since we had escaped from the corpse Yin sect. I didn't know how strong the corpse had become. Of course, it didn't matter if its power had increased or not. I wouldn't be its match. If Yan Nantian had awakened its spirit and recognized him as its master, I wouldn't have dared to provoke it. However, Yan Nantian didn't know about Xiao Jin. He had kept the corpse as a host so that I could refine it into a corpse puppet. That was why he wouldn't awaken the corpse's spirit or make it recognize him as its master. It was also because of this that I had the idea to subdue the corpse. After leaving the Feng Shui metaphysics shop, I arrived at Yan Nanshan's hotel. After finding the room, the hotel's door wasn't a problem for me. so I casually opened it. After entering, I saw that Ling Duyu, who had turned into a zombie, was still standing stiffly by the wall of the room. He didn't make a sound or move, just like a statue. When he saw me enter, he only turned his head slightly to look at me. Apart from that, he didn't have any other reaction. Although I had already predicted the corpse's situation, this was related to my safety, so I didn't dare to be careless. After closing the door, I didn't hurry to touch the corpse. Instead, I arranged several earth carrier formations around me. Then I took out the yin-yang yama brush and the silver talisman that Grandpa Li had given me. Then I carefully waved at the corpse, calling it to come closer. Hearing my call, the zombie quickly turned around and carefully looked at me a few times. Then it slowly lifted its feet and walked towards me. I heaved a sigh of relief. It seemed my speculation was correct. The corpse hadn't awakened its spirit, so it was still as pure as before. Just when I thought that I had succeeded, the zombie suddenly stopped after taking a few steps. Fear appeared in its eyes as it stood there in a daze. It hesitantly lifted its foot and put it down. Its face showed a panicked expression. No matter what I said, it didn't continue to walk towards me. I had just calmed down, but now I was tense again. However, after observing for a while, I found that the ghoul was just a little scared. It didn't have any other intentions, let alone hostility. How could this be? What was it afraid of? I lowered my head to look at the silver talisman in my hand and the earth-carrying formation under my feet. Regardless of whether it was the magic tool or the formation, they all contained a strong power. Although ordinary people couldn't see it, the ghouls were natural spiritual creatures, so they could naturally sense this aura. They were most likely afraid of me and didn't dare to walk toward me. After pondering for a moment, I left the earth-carrying formation and put away the magic tools and talismans in my hand. However, I didn't leave the earth-carrying formation too far. That way, if the situation turned bad, I would be able to return to the formation as fast as possible. After doing all of this, I called out to the ghoul again. This time, although the ghoul's face still showed fear, it hesitated and slowly walked in front of me. It looked at me obediently with its wooden eyes. Its gaze was a little perplexed and curious. A warm smile spread across my face as I ran my hand over his face, and then down his back. Slowly, the ghoul's nervousness subsided. It lifted its head to look at me, its face showing a gentle smile. At this moment, I could confirm that my speculation was correct. Next, I sat down next to the ghoul and gently asked, "I remember that the last time I saw you, you still looked like a child. How did you become like this now?" The ghoul tilted its face and looked at me. After a moment of silence, it softly replied, It was that grandfather. He made me become like this." What? I was stunned. Changed? Originally, I thought that Yen Nantian had used some method to make the ghoul look like this. Why did it say that it could change? I suspiciously looked at it. After thinking for a moment, I said, "Can you change back?" The ghoul immediately nodded, seeming to be happy. The corners of its mouth curved into a smile. However, it immediately retracted its smile and said with grievance, "I don't like my current appearance. I want to change back, but Grandfather said that I can only change back when he gives me permission." I patted its back and softly said, as if I was coaxing a child, that Grandfather has gone to a faraway place. He won't be coming back. He asked me to take care of you, so you don't need to care about him. If you want to change back, you can do it. The ghoul's face instantly revealed a joyful smile. It excitedly asked, "Really?" When I nodded, the ghoul's body instantly changed. From the previous wooden young man's appearance, it turned back into the little zombie that I had seen before. I was stunned. This was a real transformation technique, completely different from the one I had used when I had used the MO bead. The shifting ink bead was a magical item. It borrowed the power of Dao Qi to slightly change its shape and achieve the purpose of disguising itself. However, the zombie's transformation technique was completely different. The little zombie's appearance was not only completely different from Ling Duyu's, even its height and weight were different. It wasn't just a transformation, but a real transformation. After being shocked for a long time, I asked the ghoul, "How did you know this transformation technique?" The ghoul was bewildered and couldn't explain. It just said that it knew how to do it. It was an innate gift. I couldn't help but sigh in admiration. No wonder Yan Nantian had said that we were lucky that day. He had even said that the ghoul and Tong Tong were treasures in the world of metaphysics. In terms of mysticism, the ghoul was even better than Tong Tong. After the transformation, the ghoul's clothes were too big. I couldn't wear them anymore. I asked the ghoul to stay in the room while I went out to buy a set of children's clothes for the ghoul to change into. While I was changing, I found a small wooden box in the ghoul's pocket. The box was hollow, and there were some small holes on each side. When I shook the box, some gray gas flew out of the holes. I felt strange and asked the ghoul, "What is it?" The ghoul told me, "It's something that my grandfather gave me." Did it belong to Yan Nantian? I looked at it for a long time and then tried to pour my shaman energy into it. After a long time, I didn't see any reaction. When I was about to put it away, I suddenly had an idea. I left a wisp of shaman energy inside the box. Then I looked at the ghoul and asked him to take 2 steps forward. As soon as my thoughts flickered, the ghoul lifted his feet and walked forward. I immediately understood. This small wooden box was what Yan Nantian had used to control the ghoul. It was no wonder he could make the ghoul transform into Ling Duyu. Besides the ghoul's innate gift of transformation, he also had to rely on this small wooden box. After hesitating for a while, I put the small wooden box back into the ghoul's new pocket. Since I could use this thing, I decided to leave it with the ghoul. Perhaps it would be useful in the future. After everything was ready, I took the ghoul back to the feng shui metaphysics shop. When we reached the room on the 2nd floor, the ghoul paled when it saw Xiaojin. It was so scared that it hid behind me. In the Corpsine sect, the place where ghouls were born had the corpse of the Tai Sui. It could sense Xiaojin's aura, so it was normal for it to be scared. I squatted and comforted it for a while. Then I called Xiaojin over. Xiaojin was also interested in the ghoul. After talking to it for a long time, the ghoul's fears subsided a little. It trembled and sat on the edge of the bed. It still didn't dare to talk to Xiaojin, but at least it didn't hide behind me anymore. At this moment, Tong Tong came out of the jade bracelet. He smiled and approached the ghoul. Unlike Xiaojin, the ghoul showed a friendly expression when it saw Tong Tong. When Tong Tong asked, it didn't hesitate or get scared. Soon, it started to talk to Tong Tong. I saw that the 3 of them were getting along well, so I smiled and left the room for them. Then I went downstairs. Xie Chenghua was still sitting downstairs. When he saw me, he cheerfully walked over and chatted with me. After receiving the 2 heavenly thunder talismans, he had adjusted his mood. The worried expression on his face had disappeared.